All right. Thanks, Natalie. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. You're live at the World Cup welcome to Kadence Hybrid Pulse Check live Q&A. We've got some amazing guests for you today. We'll just wait a few moments and allow the masses in Qatar to trickle in here. But hope everyone's had a great Thanksgiving for those of us in North America. Jared, what did you get up to? Did you get skiing at all? What did you get up to?
No, very low key here. Really cold, but I don't ski, so just kind of stayed in and enjoyed some hot cocoa in the World Cup, especially the draw we were able to pull off Friday. So
I'm forgetting the England USA game. I'm forgetting that on Friday. Nick, what does Thanksgiving look like on campus at Stanford?
Very quiet. All the students, mostly they go home. Actually, some don't go home because you know that Thanksgiving travel is horrible. And
Yeah.
the university for last week was closed. But look, if you got to travel far away, you know, it's maybe not worth it. So some folks were there. But it is, you know, the students are back. I would say bright and early. It's 9 o'clock. That's too early for most students. You know, campus doesn't come to light until about 10 in the morning local time.
The bicycle traffic isn't significant.
When I teach, I like to have my class that you basically here we have just 1 hour, 50 minutes, 2 hour slots, but you lose 10 minutes for students to move between. So I normally go for the 9:30 to 11:20, which the students deem incredibly early, but has great positive selection. The students that turn up are very enthusiastic and keen. So, you know, has that going for it. But I hear feedback like, why so early? Living out on the West Coast, I'm like up at 6 a.m. because people on the East Coast, you have to connect in.
Awesome. And Cindy, how about you? Good week?
Yeah, great week. It was just the core family and no traveling this year, which was a bonus to us because the travel is crazy this time of year. So we were happy to just stay put and do some hiking and outdoor things because we lucked out with some decent weather. So I'm happy to be back at work now.
For sure. Well, welcome everybody to Kadence Hybrid Pulse, our November edition. It's fantastic to see everybody in here. I'm joined today by an amazing panel. We have Jared Olszewski, who's the VP of Customer Success here at Kadence, based out of Salt Lake City. Cindy Brohoski. We've got the skis in the name. I didn't realize that before we started here as well. From Avison Young, Nick Bloom. Nick, they're now calling you the unofficial father of hybrid. Is that right? Something like that, or unofficial father of remote work, something along those lines.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's good or bad. I was about to say for today, I should be Nick Bloomski. Would like, you know, would work perfect.
Professor at Stanford and co-founder of WFH Work From Home Research. And then my name's Stan. I'm the co-founder and CEO at Kadence. It's going to be about 45 minutes or so. We're going to have each of the panelists go through a mixture of kind of what they've been seeing in the market, what they've been seeing companies evolve into over the last quarter. So there's going to be a little kind of mini keynote from each of the panelists and what they've seen, everything from Nick all the way through to Jared and what he's seeing on the ground as well with Kadence customers. So some really practical stuff in here as well. And it's not like a lot's been happening, right? We haven't seen billionaires acquire companies and change the way people work overnight. So nothing much has really happened in this quarter. So I'm sure this will be a short one. And then feel free, please, there's a Q&A section as ever. There's a chat section. Please drop your Q&As in there, or your Qs in there, rather. We'll try and A them as we go through. But let's dive straight in. So Nick, I've had the pleasure of knowing you coming up for a year now, and it's just been amazing to see the richness and quantity of data that's coming out from you and your team. Perhaps 30 seconds on you and why you're so interested in this space, and then we'll dive into what you've seen.
Sure. You know, weirdly enough, I started working from home almost 20 years ago. I was kind of interested in it part because my wife and I are doing a bit. I grew up with parents that both work from home. I'm British, but my mum and dad work for the British government. I'm one of 4 kids, and it was kind of like part of childcare. I have to say, no one was that interested in work from home until March 2020, at which point it's been insane. It's like the explosion of interest. So since that time, have been collecting a lot of data, and probably is relevantly for today, talking to hundreds of organizations. I've probably spoken to literally about 1,000 organizations, a lot of companies, but odd things like the UN World Food Program, the World Bank, my local city council, a linear accelerator, which is an atom. You just can't imagine how varied, a lot of schools and hospitals. So I'll go through today with data here, but then I'll talk in the Q&A on kind of more direct experience. So first stylized fact, work from home is basically now stabilizing. So this is a graph of the share of days in the US, full days that people work from home. Before the pandemic, it's about 5%. So some people did, but it's frankly pretty rare to work from home a full day before the pandemic. During the pandemic, early months, kind of, May, June, July 2020, it surged to 60%. Anyone that could, which is probably pretty much everyone listening, think of, anyone with a university degree, college degree, work from home full time. It's now settling down, and you can see now the last 6 months, it looks like it's kind of stabilized. So we're looking at now about 30% of days in the US work from home. I have data from Europe. I just talked to it. Northern Europe, UK, for example, looks very similar. Southern Europe, Asia is a bit lower, but we've seen similar huge surges around the world. Basically, office workers have moved from fully in person pre-pandemic to typically 2-3 days a week in the office. So next slide, thanks. So what's this look like on the ground? Well, the economy is made up of 3 groups, and pretty much every organization I talked to is made up of 3 groups. And in fact, it generates some tension. But why don't I just go through what they are? So the biggest group, this is again US data, but it looks similar to much of Europe, which is about half of people, they have to come in every day. So these are frontline employees. Think when you go into McDonald's or Chipotle, or someone, an Uber driver, or all the way up to very high skilled jobs like a surgeon or an airline pilot. These are jobs that have to be done in person. They are mostly lower paid, but not entirely. There's a second group, which I'm guessing is the majority probably of people listening today, which is hybrid. So basically this is professionals, managers in the 1,000 or so organizations I've talked to. Almost all of them have basically said for managers and professionals, we're hybrid, which means they typically come in 2-3 days a week. Most standardly would be coming in the office Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, work from home Monday, Friday. And then the final group are fully remote. This is a group that was pretty small pre-pandemic, has grown a lot. Everyone has in mind, this is like Airbnb or top-end coders. It's not mostly those folks. So this is 15% of the labor force. To give you 14%, to give you a sense, in America, given there's about 170 million people that work, you're looking at something like 25 million people here. So wow. Airbnb and other elite coders is maybe 500,000 at most. Mostly these people are IT support, payroll, contractors, HR, benefits, call centers that are working fully remote.
Wow.
So why hybrid has become the big deal is this is 30% of people, but it's about 50% of payroll, and it covers pretty much all professionals and managers. So when I talk to companies, they're like, look, fully on site, we get, you just come in every day like as normal. Fully remote, we kind of get, it's a bit unusual, but we kind of figured it out, and there aren't much choices to make. Hybrid in the middle is the hardest. It's half our payroll. It's all our managers and professionals. This is the bit we're struggling with. So next slide, thanks.
Interesting.
So, why is hybrid difficult? There are many reasons. And we'll go, I'd say that most companies are settling in on anchor days and you're coming in 2-3 days a week, but there are other flavors. And one of the big challenges is employees have a wide range of what they want. So we ask people this question, how often do you like to have paid work days at home each week? And what you see is 16% of people say rarely or never. They tend to be 20 somethings that are single. They don't have great apartments. It's kind of depressing being at home. They're social. They want to come in and get mentored. So they say, look, I want to come in 5 days a week. And in fact, many of my students in Stanford don't want to work from home at all. At the other extreme, there's about 32% of people that say they'd love to work from home full time. They often have younger kids. They live at, nice houses. They got long commutes. They're happy to be fully remote. And then the remaining folks, which honestly would include myself, want to be hybrid. That's about half the workforce. they want to come in anywhere between 1 to 4 days a week. And you can see if you're a manager, just stop here. This already makes life really difficult. You can see why Tim Cook was facing a rebellion in Apple, because he has 150,000 employees and 1,000 of them signed a petition saying they'd want to work from home full time. You can see based on this data, if Apple looks like this, it's not 1,000, it'd be more like 40, 50,000 that would genuinely want to work from home full time in Apple. Tim Cook's problem is there's 100,000, the majority that want to come in at least 1 day a week. So whatever he does in a big company, you've got thousands and thousands of people that have different views. And why I actually think what he did was about right was he went for the middle point. He said, look, the average person, Apple typically wants 2-3 days a week at home. I'm going to do that. So next slide. Thanks. So the final thing is, say you go to hybrid. So you're say doing 2-3 or 3-2 or whatever flavor you want. How to organize this? What the biggest so what is, if you ask people when they do come into the office why they want to do it, they want to come in to see their colleagues. So we ask, what are the top 3 benefits of coming to your employer's business premises? 1 and 2 are basically coming in with them. So if Cindy, Dan, Jared, and I work together, what you hear repeatedly is people hate it. If I come in on Monday, Cindy Tuesday, Dan on Wednesday, Jared Thursday, Friday, and like whenever we're in, no one else is there, and we say, why did we come into the office? I didn't come in for the free bagel or the ping pong table or whatever it is. I came in to basically see and work with colleagues. So this is why coordination here, come back to what Kadence is doing, and coordination and anchor days has become critical. People seem to want to come in 2-3 days a week, but they want to come in to see their co-workers. And I'll stop there.
Cool. The data here is so rich, Nick, and Cindy and Jared, I'm going to pick on you in a moment as well for questions for Nick here. Is this, going back to your first slide here, Nick, and those on the line as well, please do drop notes into the Q&A section as well. If you have questions for Nick, now's the time to get them in. How do you see this trend line going forwards? Is this going to be just till the end of the year? Is this going to be here for 2 or 3 years? Are we going to be trending around this? Is this going to slowly creep up? Because of course, this great hybrid experiment is now happening at a time where the economy isn't in the most healthiest of conditions either. So it's not as if we're doing this in a bubble where, you know, there are no other outside influences as well. So how do you see this playing out, and is recession or pending recession going to play a role here too?
Great. I think it's going to follow a Nike swoosh, which means a little bit of a drop and a long run pickup. And to explain this, the 4 reasons why you ask when, you know, in the data, and I talk to companies why they like hybrid, is the main one is it keeps employees happy. The second is it seems to slightly boost productivity. The third is it supports DEI. And the fourth is it saves a little bit on space. All of those reasons are just as true in recessions as in booms. You know, there's no reason why suddenly in a recession you don't care about those things. So when I talk to companies, they're saying we are doing hybrid to make money. I mean, it's basically to improve the business performance. It's not a social good that we abandon as soon as the recession. We're doing it because it makes business sense. So maybe there'd be a bit of a drop down. I could see this maybe. I've got November's data. I just haven't, just processing it this week. It looks very similar. At best, it could drop 2-3%, 25%, but it's nowhere, it's never going back to pre-pandemic. It's completely not. The reason it's a swoosh in the long run is the other fact I see is what I'm going to call market size effect. So as an economist, if the market for making hybrid products goes up 6-fold, lots of companies start making better technology, better software to service it, like Kadence, a perfect example. Kadence provides products to coordinate coming into the office and make, hybrid work effectively. There are many other products from my, my laptop camera. I'm touching it here, my microphone. I've seen all, I had dinner the other day. Someone is making a 3D holographic image. So all of this stuff is coming. It's maybe 3 to 5 years away. This is going to make it easier to work from home. If I think of my experience, when I started on this 20 years ago, it was telephone calls with freeconference2call.com and emailing files. And it was pretty horrible. And about 10 years ago, we got Dropbox, Zoom, Teams, etc. So in the short run, it may drop a bit. In the long run, if you're planning 5 years out, expect technology to push this up.
Nick, question from John on the Q&A here, and talking about the 3 to 5 years out. Are there any countries, states, locations where they're more progressive? Like what policies are you seeing in different parts of the world? We know, for example, that for our companies in the southeast of the UK, for example, they seem really progressive compared to some other locations in the mid-US, for example. So can you talk to about are you seeing different things happen in different locations, and are any more progressed?
Sure. So globally, some of the highest numbers tend to be in North America, so US, Canada, and Northern Europe, the UK, Ireland in particular. We've collected data from around the world. I've been working with a big Chinese company, Trip.com, for example, and working with some Australians. You see around the world, professionals, folks like us, typically have been increasing levels of work from home. The reason it's been, if you go into Asia, for example, it's lower levels. It's still gone up a bit. It's lower levels, partly because people live in small apartments, and it's harder if you have a couple living in an apartment with 2 small bedrooms and 1 living room. No one wants to work from home in their bedroom. So then you have a congestion problem. There's some cultural issues. Even so, Trip, for example, just announced they're working from home 2 days a week. Alibaba's copying that. Obviously in China, there's other issues going on, but this is a global trend. It's supported by broadband. It's supported by, more supportive, progressive policies. But I would say if you have someone that's a university graduate working for a largest company around the world, I had a call earlier with India. I just got off a 1-hour call with India, and everyone on that call was at home. And some of them have been in work during the day. Some of them have just worked from home for the day. So it's a very global phenomenon.
It's interesting when we talk on this slide about the different demographics coming in for different things as well, and different ages as well. My daughter, she's 8, so she's probably not a great point in study here, but she's saying when she's older she wants to go into an office. She just brought it up on herself. She's like, well, Dad, you're only working from home because of the pandemic, right? I'm like, well, no, it's actually all changed. She's kind of got this, even as an 8-year-old, she's got this social idea that she's going to be going into the office. Jared, what are you seeing from our customers? We've got about 300 companies all over the world with thousands of spaces. What are you seeing policy-wise from country to country, region to region?
Well, it's really a mix, and I think it's just as people are trying to figure it out, what works best for them. And, based on that, those demographics that Nick was bringing up, as well as proximity to the office, how many people have moved away from their hub during COVID because it was all work from home. But yeah, we're seeing that mix. We're seeing a lot of the same type of things with these demographics of people coming in, a couple of days a week, or employers wanting to bring them in and trying to figure out how to best entice them. And again, with the various age categories, as there's different motivations there. So it is interesting, and we are seeing that stabilization, but I'm really kind of interested to see what happens, next year with kind of a fresh restart. So,
John, thank you for your question there. And then Stephanie on the Q&A as well. Interesting that FaceTime, Nick, with managers is lower on benefits of going into the office, but everyone is talking about proximity bias in terms of performance and rewards. And Stephanie's absolutely right. That was a very large part of, if I'm going in when the CEO is going to go in, I'm going to be more trusted. Trust is around proximity, et cetera, et cetera. Are we seeing any of that? Is that happening, those people that are going in?
So firstly, to validate the question, proximity bias is definitely a major real thing. So for example, I did an experiment in 2010 where we got around 500 volunteers to work from home. We randomized them by even and odd birthdays. If you have an odd birthday, you actually got to work from home 4 days a week. And if you had an even birthday, you stayed in the office full time. And we tracked these people. I published this paper many years ago, and we tracked them. We found that folks that were working from home 4 days a week, their promotion rates were halved after a year and a half. So that is an enormous effect. So proximity bias is a huge thing. And we interviewed managers, and they said, look, 2 things are going on. One is, honestly, there is some discrimination against remote workers. They get forgotten about, they get passed over. We could have probably trained to done a better job about that. But it's not, you can't perfectly train it away. The other thing they said is really hard to deal with, because when you come into the office, you're chatting over lunch, over coffee, etc. And, if you're doing this 5 days a week, you're connecting, you're learning what's going on. Whereas if you're fully remote, it's harder to do that. So firstly, proximity bias is a real thing. I think the solution to this, again, when I talk to firms, is being organized. And again, come back to Kadence or Anchor Days, is having some way to make sure everyone's in on the same day. So imagine the 4 of us, Jared, Dan, Cindy, and I, are all working together. If we all come in on Tuesday, Thursday together, and we all work from home Monday, Friday, there's no real proximity bias. You're all there together, all working there well together. Even if, our manager, I guess, comes in Monday, Friday, at least if we're at home, you don't get this issue. Where the problem is where people are coming in more or less days, it's uncoordinated. and then there's a race. If I know, say, Dan has decided to come in on Friday, it's not clear that I can legitimately stay home. I may say, look, Dan's coming in. He's, sucking up to the boss. I need to come in too. And then Cindy says, I got to come in too. And then the whole thing collapses. And in fact, I was speaking to a company a couple of months ago where the CHR, she was saying, the CEO, and I had work from home Monday, Friday, the CEO decided that they wanted to come in now on a Friday. And of course, the people reporting to the CEO felt that they had to come in too. And the people reporting to, and she said it kind of collapsed. And they had to say to the CEO, you need to stay home on home days. So proximity bias is A, real thing. And B, managers need to lead and they need to stay home on home days, which may be, say, Monday, Friday. If they come in, it destroys that setup and it's actually very destructive to the organization.
So much of this, though, is about optimizing, right? And optimization. So you talked there about the peak at the end of the week following that influencer, in this case, that CEO. What we see most of all in our data, which we'll go through in a moment, is kind of the midweek mountain, of usage of people coming in. Kind of flicking to Rob Swan's question here as well on the Q&A is, one of the real benefits of tools like Kadence is trying to flatten out those peaks to almost like this shared intuition of people going in, when's the right time to go in. Jared, we've worked with one company where they've reduced their real estate by 68%, but they've also increased their number of people coming in regularly by 25%. So Jared, what policies, and Cindy perhaps as well, we'll come on to your slides in just a second here, and so you might want to segue onto the second part of this as well. But Jared, what policies are you seeing play into that? Because we've definitely noticed those companies that have a vision, those companies that are able to enact that vision have buy-in, and those people that are too loose about it do not work out.
Yeah, I think what we've seen, and there have been a couple that we've been able to quantify, like you mentioned, but we're seeing it with others where their real estate footprint has changed as a result of the pandemic, whether they were able to reduce that until they kind of saw what post-pandemic was going to be like, or they just had a scaling of the workforce. But being able to if they have more employees and they have resources, being able to say, okay, we're going to bring in these teams on Monday and Tuesday, and we're going to bring in these teams Wednesday and Thursday, and we're going to maximize that real estate spend, which is so significant. But really trying to understand what does this look like, and whether it's anchor days or whether it's really trying to understand the needs and the desires of their workforce, and then being able to adjust that real estate accordingly. But it's that data and really trying to understand, how do we control our spend, and how do we provide our employees with the best situation to be productive and collaborative.
Yeah. I think one of the challenges with anchor days is that a term that we use is called forced hybrid. It means you have to be in on these days, and employees are so used to higher levels of autonomy now, they want to have the freedom to select. But also, if you have forced hybrid, you have to come in on these days, and perhaps it's a harder challenge to figure out your distribution of real estate. So Apple, for example, perhaps they don't have a cost problem with the amount of real estate they have, but they're in a unique situation where they can afford to have permanent desks for everybody for the most part, whereas other companies, space is their second largest cost. So there's a real opportunity, Cindy, to manage that effectively and to find that optimization balance. So Cindy, any thoughts on that before we jump into you?
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely seeing our clients looking at ways to reduce the costs related to their real estate as they're implementing these hybrid work environments. And a big part of it is reimagining what the smaller space looks like. It's not the typical office space anymore. It integrates collaboration space, lounge areas, different components to that office that weren't there before. And that helps drive the attendance and the need for people to get together and collaborate. So we're definitely seeing the reduction in space, but also the reimagination of what the space looks like and how it's used.
Awesome. So what are you seeing? What are Avison Young seeing across your client base and your data?
So as we look at the major cities across the United States, we're seeing that those cities that have high arts and entertainment districts are getting higher levels of office occupancy. And the numbers are cut off on these two that are highlighted, but Charleston and Las Vegas are highlighted. They are both seeing over 70% in their occupancy levels. And this is looking at the week of October 31st this year, compared to the week preceding the lockdown in March of 2020. And then some other cities that also have higher in the 60% range are going to be Miami and parts of New York City, Nashville. And again, those have high entertainment values and districts where people are going into the office and then from there going to restaurants, going to, museums, those types of things. So we're seeing that the level of occupancy with the arts and entertainment are near pre-COVID levels, which is helping to drive the office occupancy as well. Next slide. Here we're looking at the type of office space that's occupied, and we're finding that by and large, the trophy buildings are seeing higher attendance than the Class A and Class B buildings. And this looks at the United States as a whole versus a single city, which in this case is Washington, D.C. And you can see that its levels for the trophy are 50 to 60% versus the 42 to 48%. Again, the trophy buildings are going to have the higher amenities. So they're going to have the new improved gyms. They're going to have the tenant lounges. They're going to have more of the amenities that might drive people into the office versus sitting in their home. So that's part of the reason that the trophy buildings are seeing higher attendance. And I think what's around those trophy buildings as well on the amenity side is helping that also. Next page. So this is looking at the different industries and their office occupancy levels. And the highest is the flex office provider. This plays into the hub and spoke type of system that a lot of companies are implementing. So that we learned during COVID that you're not sitting in traffic for an hour getting to your office each way. And a lot of people don't want to waste that time now that they've gotten that time back. So they're looking at the flex providers that may be in the suburbs closer to their homes that are allowing them still some collaboration space, some of those amenities that they want, the coffee bars, those types of things. So the flex office providers are very high in this category. Some of the others that are high are education, real estate, education. The kids are back on campus. The professors are teaching in the classrooms again. Real estate. The nature of the business with real estate is collaborating with people, showing space, meeting with people. So that's driving a lot of the office occupancy as well. Next slide. And this looks, as we talked earlier, about the days of the week and this peak in the middle of the week. What we're seeing is that Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday tend to be the highest days for office occupancy, with Monday and Friday falling shorter. What we're seeing in DC is that the rate on Friday is much higher than Monday, and in some cases higher than Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And again, we're seeing that people are coming into the office on Friday thinking we'll go to happy hour with a group after work. We'll go do this after work. We'll attend, a play or something. So that's helping to drive the attendance on Fridays over the Monday that we have seen across the board since the start of the pandemic.
Super interesting, Cindy. Yeah, I was wondering if there's happy hours playing into that, on a Friday in particular. The entertainment scene is also fascinating. That's something we haven't come across before, but certainly rings true. I think with what we're seeing across the data on on our end. A question from the audience here. Are you seeing kind of, you talked a lot about the spaces, the geographic areas here. Are you seeing a difference in your clients that are offering assigned desks or assigned offices versus do people still want to come into their family photos and their cactus on their desk, or are they happy in these different areas to be hot desking, but wanting to make sure that they're sat next to their colleague? What, are you seeing any difference again there, and in particular across any of these regions?
We're seeing that it's still a very new environment. So a lot of the companies are offering both the, hoteling desk and the permanent desks, and they're still figuring it out. So I think a lot of them are implementing programs, but making sure that those are adaptable as they see the use happening. So while they're setting up the program, they know that it may change over time, and they're kind of just watching to see how it's used. With people with permanent desks, are they actually using them? Are they coming in? Or are they saying, oh, I'm going to work from home instead? With the hoteling, are people using them, or are they, again, wanting to stay home or wanting a permanent desk? So I think it's still very flexible from what we've seen with our clients.
Got you. And in terms of these different sectors here, it looks like banking and finance. Why are they having more people come in? Is it something about the type of work they're doing? Or is it more about the DNA of leadership?
I think it's both. But I do think a lot of it has to do with the work that they're doing, and that they're told they need to be in the office, they need to be communicating with their other staff members. And I think just the nature of the banking industry, the leadership tends to have better management when people are on site. That's just the nature of their business and how they've always done business. So I think the hybrid comes harder to them.
Yeah.
And Nick, maybe you have more insight on that.
Why banking? I spoke to, the CEO of one of the big banks. I don't want to name them, but they said there's a lot of banking finance you can't do remote. So certainly for trading and stuff using confidential data, it's impossible to do that. Some activities, in our stuff, we see tech is by far and away the largest industry in terms of work from home uptake. And then number two after that is finance and insurance and banking. I think partly because they're very graduate heavy. So if you look, it's basically graduates that are working from home. Non-grads tend to have much lower levels because they don't tend to do so much stuff on computers. But you're right, banking finance, we don't see many people fully remote. A very typical thing is those that aren't using confidential stuff are at home Monday, Friday, but are in Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday.
Yeah, some of our finance companies and banking companies have got, they add Bloomberg terminals to their amenities on Kadence, and then traders can search for desks with the Bloomberg terminals on there. Is there, Cindy, as well, in terms of the different regions as well? Nick and I both are in Silicon Valley here, where I'm not going to put words in Nick's mouth, so I'll say it, but employers are more afraid of their employees than the other way around in most cases, I would say. Is there a difference coast, if banking predominantly is on the East Coast, if we're talking about is there a difference in culture, do you think, in terms of Goldman, you're going to be in, we're going to perform. Goldman have got a very kind of heavy, we're going to work all hours we possibly can kind of culture, at least from a zeitgeist perspective. You noticing different regions being more afraid of their employees, being more relaxed, being more open? Anything playing in there?
So I think the West Coast is dominated by technology companies. And I think, overall, through the United States, we see 43% is kind of an average, but tech is closer to 35%, 37% in their occupancy levels. So I think the East Coast is probably just higher than the West Coast. And I don't see that changing unless the tech firms start bringing people back. But I think they tend to be more, like you said, employee sensitive and the war on talent. They want to provide that flexibility to help attract people. And as Nick said, the graduates that are going to these tech companies want the flexibility. So I think the West Coast tends to have a lower occupancy level than the East Coast.
Maybe the anonymous attendee is asked if you could clarify your question by what you mean by 2 desks in one office. That would be super helpful. But Cindy, Lisa's asking here, what types of communication tools are you seeing, if any, to keep office workers in the know in regards to updates, information, rather than kind of getting lost in the mix? Is there like this shared intuition? How are people being updated of, hey, it's going to be after work drinks on Friday, or we're going to have an all hands on Wednesday? What tools are you seeing companies adopt?
So a lot of companies are using platforms like Kadence and implementing those across their employee base, so that the remote workers, when company communications are pushed out, they're pushed out through the tool, and everyone remote, hybrid, and permanent in the office see all the same communications. And they're trying to integrate so that no one feels left out, so that they can see where their colleagues are. Are they in the office today? Are they out of the office? So I think a lot of these technology tools are now being implemented with these companies to bring people together, even though they're all in different locations.
Yeah, I think even internally, we've seen at Kadence, how we do it, it's all about how you use the tools as well. So for example, we're on Slack and a bunch of our customers are on Teams. And so the leadership at Kadence and some of our customers as well, might do a weekly video from the CEO, just a quick 45 seconds, say, this is what's happened, this is what we're working on next week. It might just be a way to kind of almost like an announcement. So I think we're seeing like these tools, particularly like Slack and Teams, if they're used well, actually becoming a little bit like an old school intranet for the distribution of information and kind of keeping everybody up to speed. We're going to flick over to the other thing I would say as well on that is, Lisa, the other tools that we're seeing being used, and it's interesting, Cindy, you've got it here as well, flexible office providers. So this kind of elastic storage, to use a computing term, or Dropbox for space, being able to turn on extra storage and use a WeWork or Regus or what have you. And again, that's interesting. I've got a WeWork pass globally. I'm able to use them wherever. And the London ones are always really, really busy compared to the ones here. Is that a tool that you're seeing many people using? And again, any region bias on that? And it also ties, I think, with John's question about Nick, which I'd love to pass to you afterwards, about that hub and spoke flexible space model. Is that also making kind of the de-urbanization happen as well into smaller towns? So Cindy, perhaps start with you.
Sure. We're definitely seeing the use of these WeWorks and companies looking to provide closer distance for people to travel so that they can perform their work. As Nick mentioned, some of the graduates may be in small apartments and, it's not conducive to working all day. So going to a WeWork or Regus offers them an office environment without having to go, the long commute. And so we are seeing it in a lot of areas around the country being offered as an alternative.
And Nick, is that making the de-urbanization effect happening? New York being slightly quieter than it used to be, San Francisco definitely being quieter. Is that, one of the advantages from having a flexible space is the mother-in-law is staying this week, right? And you don't have the spare bedroom anymore to work from home in. Is any of that playing a part in the de-urbanization? I know from friends at Apple as well, they might have bought a place 45 minutes further out of Cupertino. So they've kind of de-urbanized themselves a little bit more as well.
Yeah, so 2 things I've seen. One is there's been a huge effect called the donut effect, which is people move out of city centers into the suburbs. So in data, we've seen about 1 million Americans have left the biggest cities and moved out to the suburbs. So, if you used to have to go into central San Francisco to work in a tech firm 5 days a week, Now they're only asking you to come in 2 days a week. It's a lot more appealing to move to the East Bay.
Unless you're
you
at
get a
Twitter.
nice home office. Sorry? Yeah,
Unless you're-
well, Twitter, I mean, look, you have to read today's newspaper to find out, what is actually happening in Twitter. It's off. But so there's a lot of people have moved out. Now, the question is whether firms have moved out. I generally have not seen firms move out. So the companies I talk to, their view is we still want a central location that is, as Cindy said, is a kind of trophy nice office. If you want people to come in and collaborate 2-3 days a week, you want to make it something nice and you want to make it where their co-workers come into. What I've seen is flexible office providers doing very well, in part, as you both mentioned, as a flexible short-run solution. So a lot of companies are like, Cindy mentioned this, we're not entirely sure what's happening in the future. It's expensive to rapidly change leases. So they've let some leases expire and they're using flexible space to turn things over. They're thinking, you know what, this thing's going to settle down in 2023, 24. Let's not pay some long 10-year lease. Let's just have a bit of flexible space. Or individuals. I have several friends Dan, you mentioned they're doing the same thing as you. They've got WeWork passes because they can't get back into their offices, or the company has just said, we'll pay for this while we're relocating. So it's not obvious that flexible office is going to do well in the long run. I think in 24, 25, people are going to figure it out. They're going to use, honestly, stuff like Kadence. So the discussion earlier is pretty fascinating about how much you use space effectively. There's 2 models I've heard a lot, and it's a massive challenge for companies. One model is like anchor days, where everyone comes in Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. That's easy to organize, but it's very inefficient on space. You're wasting all this space on Monday, Friday. And then the other day is let's coordinate, let's use Kadence or other tools to have different teams in on different sub days. They come in together, but the teams don't overlap. It's like how we use teaching rooms at Stanford. We can't all teach at the same time in the same lecture hall, so we schedule it. That's harder, but saves, Jared was mentioning earlier, saves a lot of money on space. And I think that is the future, but it's more complicated and it requires organization.
Why haven't we? We've been on at this, I know there's been Omicron and etc. So we've kind of had fits and starts of it. But why haven't we figured this out as a society yet? It feels like there's been so much ink, Nick, spilt over this topic. There's more clever minds than most thinking about this problem. It is, based on some of our data, the number 2 most searched term for software tools right now is kind of hybrid working. Why on earth haven't we figured this out? Is this because there's just billions of different personalities? Why haven't we figured this out?
Well, I think the first thing to highlight is this is an enormous change. This is probably the biggest change to hit the US labor market since World War II. I have various figures. I had a tweet that hit 2 million impressions. It totally showing long run work from home, and it's just climbing. Then you hit the pandemic and it explodes, and it's just a new normal. So companies are saying this is really hard. We've never seen a change this big ever before. And then this is the downside of working from home, getting spam calls. So, and then the other thing is there's a real trade-off between this saving space versus coordination. So if you go back to 2019, we're only really using the office Monday to Friday, kind of 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. So that's, typically, 50 hours, and there's about 168 hours in the week. So most of the time offices were empty. They're empty on the weekends and nights throughout the night. It's now even more extreme if you have anchor days on, let's say, Tuesday to Thursday. And so this is the point. I think a lot of companies are saying, look, it's just so inefficient. There has to be a better way, but it's hard because you've got to coordinate. The problem with the coordinate thing is who comes in, who do you want to come in on the days you come in? What desk do you want? What facilities do you want? What are your customers doing? You can see it's a very complicated algorithm. And again, I've been working with Kadence for about a year now, and I saw that as the solution to this kind of problem. If everyone puts in their views and their preferences and their desires and co-workers, you can start to coordinate, but it's tough. It is genuinely really tough.
Yeah. And I think the other thing, Jared, will warm up, Jared, stretch off because we're about to come to you. But we just see companies in this. We talk about going from chaos to order and then from order to optimization. And it's just very interesting which companies are on which end of that spectrum, because some people, you're absolutely right, are like, right, we're at the optimization layer. We want to have Jane, John, and Jim come in on these days, but only if Jim's kid isn't going to be sick that day. Therefore, we're all going to stay at home because, so there's all sorts of nth degrees of optimization. A customer the other day wanted to have if they only had 20% occupancy, to automatically have the second, third, and fourth floor unavailable that day to book, because they wanted to have everybody on the first floor and save all the energy and utility bills from running that space. And we've had the fortune of being in a couple of two of our customers' ESG reports recently from contributing towards that part of their business by the better optimization of space. So there is this, I think that's the question if you're trying to think about a hybrid policy, is where are you? Are you in the trying to create order out of chaos stage, or are you in trying to create the optimization order to optimization stage? Jared, you are helping thousands of employees figure this out around the world right now, and you've been doing this for the better part of a decade as well, in this space. Some pretty obvious data here, the mountains in the middle of the week, but take us through what you're observing from a Kadence data set as well.
Yeah, so one thing we've seen a bit of, we've had some questions and we've seen some stuff in the chat, and Cindy talked a little bit about it with the like the assigned desks or the permanent desks or offices and that impact. But it kind of goes back to what Nick was just saying, is, that it's more about that coordination. I mean, I might know Cindy has an office, but just knowing that she has a set space isn't going to have me come in the office unless I know that she's there that day. And so it's that coordination rather than that location within the office. And so there's a few days, if you want to go to my slides, this is there's kind of like 4 buckets that we're finding customers falling into with their strategy or their approach. And, and really interesting trying to get this data. And each of them have their place. And so first one's kind of like crisis mode, which is, they don't really have a plan. They have space. They want people to come in, but they're just not sure how to approach it. So like, come in when you want, if you want, and this kind of goes back to your comment about maybe some fear of the employees, right? That if I push this, are they going to leave? But because there's kind of this waffling approach to it, you're not getting buy-in. And so there isn't that data to drive their decisions, there isn't that ability to coordinate because you don't know who's coming in on any given day, and there's no real structure. And then we see the opposite of that, which is the big brother, come in every day. And while it might not be the motivation, the perception is that you don't trust us as employees, that we have to be there, you have to see that. And, that gets pushed back quite a bit as we're seeing, in the news and with recent events. So while there might be a, time and a place for each of these, it's not sustainable and really needs some more direction. And so we're seeing a lot more people use this, and a lot more successful hybrid, cultures using these and the anchor days. And we've talked about that, whether it's, if there's enough space, it's saying, hey, we'd like all teams to come in on Tuesday and Wednesday. And, just so there is that in-office feeling, there's that cross collaboration. Or if they're limited in space, it's bringing the teams in on certain days, so you're getting the maximum use of that real estate. But then we're starting to really see what is kind of like the optimal thing, which is that coordination. We're giving people that freedom to come in and really control their own destiny and productivity, but giving that encouragement, like, we really want you to be in a couple days a week because we see these benefits, both productivity, both with morale and culture, but there's also, those emotional, those physical benefits of having that personal interaction and, and seeing the sunlight more than just through your windows type of thing. And the challenge there is, how do we give that visibility? How do we encourage that coordination? But when it's done right, and to Nick's point, that this is where we need to get to, and what we're trying to do at Kadence is give that visibility to really define that policy and to provide that tool to drive that change management to get that point where it's worth the commute because I know someone's in, whether it's for a social hour, whether it's for a cross collaboration, huddle. But how do we get that? There are lots of benefits to doing this. So how do we give those employees the power and the control and get their buy-in to do that? So I think we're seeing more people move to this anchor days and coordination, and obviously that's what we're trying help
Yeah.
facilitate here at Kadence.
Yeah, it's a fundamental shift, I think, in is the office the platform for where work happens by default, or is the office a tool that can be used to perform tasks in a better way that are specific? So Kate, to kind of look at your, is it Kate here? Let me just go, no, sorry. So in terms of which spaces can be used for heads up work, which spaces can be used for heads down work, you know, we talked about Las Vegas earlier being used as an example of a city where there's a huge entertainment culture. If I use the analogy, Formula One's just about to come to Las Vegas next year. Huge on our team, we're huge Formula One fans. Even though, and let's imagine that it rained in Las Vegas, right? Even though the Pirelli tire for dry weather is the absolute best tire, it would be a mistake to use that tire if it was wet outside, right? So it's that you've got to use the right tools to get the best output. And I'm just a big believer that, particularly with the recession and harder economic times, is that hybrid is going to be such, not just a drive for keeping employees and retaining employees and attracting employees, but it's going to be so much about performance. So coming in on the days that make sense, coming in to work on heads up tasks. There's no point coming in if you know exactly what you need to do necessarily for that day. You just got to execute. If you've got the situation or the ability to do so at home, you might just want to keep your heads down and work from that at home. But Nick, here there's a question on research on that point on policies pre-pandemic, post-pandemic. Have companies that perhaps have been formed post-pandemic after 2020, are they looking at this differently? I know one Kadence customer here, a crypto company in Silicon Valley, they were formed mid-2020. They started to go back to the office in January 21, and they said they're making decisions faster. They're in 2 or 3 days a week. They're a product company. They're making decisions faster. They're being more creative. And so this is the epiphany, right? This is Silicon Valley, crypto. You would think they'd all be remote, but they're coming in to make quicker decisions. So are you seeing any difference between pre, post, and how they think of office?
Great. So 2 big points. One is, if you look at fully remote, the only companies that tend to be fully remote are startups, small companies, particularly startups. A lot of fully remote startups. Like my neighbor across my back fence, if you kind of walked out through here, I'm at home right now. Niels, he started a startup and he said it's fully remote. He doesn't need office space. In fact, he has software as a service. He uses cloud compute. He has a fractional CFO. He said it's like he can start a company at like $20,000. So a lot of startups are remote, and big tech firms. So outside of, you know, the only big firms that are fully remote are tech, pretty much. I can see Cindy not, I don't really know any other large firms except tech firms are fully remote. The reason is fully remote has some big upsides. Primarily, you save on space, which is a lot. It's typically 25% of, you know, salary costs, and you can hire globally. So I've spoken to a bunch of tech CEOs that have said, look, I can hire people around the world, but there's some major costs of fully remote. One is mentoring. So, you know, particularly 20-somethings really want to mentor. My students, very few of them ever want to go to work to a fully remote company. They're like, I want to see people. I want to learn. I actually spoke to David Solomon at Goldman's, and he said the big reason they're hauling people in is mentoring. The second is innovation. You know, and the third is building culture. So I'm not surprised that a client, you know, a crypto client or any firm actually would say we make decisions faster. You probably make decisions fast. You train fast. You're more creative if you're spending 2-3 days a week in the office. The question is it worth it for paying for their office space and for paying to hire people locally? For most companies, the answer is yes. The only exceptions are small startups where they're just too small and they don't want to do it, or for a few big tech firms like Airbnb. But remember, Airbnb and Yelp are some of the exceptions, even within tech. Most tech companies are still hold offices and they're still having folks come in 2-3 days a week. So I would be very cautious to anyone going fully remote unless you're a little startup, because it's a pretty rare thing to do. And it has some big benefits, but it also has some major costs.
Jared, the policy question again has come up on the questions about, you might have a policy, but nobody's following it. What's an employer to do? Are they to get the stick out? Are they to get the carrot out? What are you seeing helping people encourage them to follow the policy?
So yeah, that seems to be the you know, the borrow something I heard from one of Nick's interviews, is the $64,000 question, right? Is, what is your change management process and how do you get buy-in? And I think the biggest thing is, how do you establish that as trust? We're not just having you come in because of micromanagement, because of visibility, but, really being intentional in creating that policy, getting feedback from the employees, and whether it's through polls or through roundtables, town halls, and then crafting that based on that culture, and then communicating effectively when you're seeing something be positive. So if you have those groups that are taking advantage of it, getting that social proof to say what is working, why are you continuing to do this, and then communicating it out. But change management is always hard, especially when it's a fundamental shift like this for so many people. But the key is to establish trust through buy-in, through communication, and through sharing those successes so that other people are willing to try it. But the stick, there might be a place for that, but as we've seen in some places where you get an email saying, do you want to still work here, it might not be the most effective when trying to build trust.
Right. Cindy, have you seen any horror stories, any nightmares where this has happened, where people have just had completely the wrong notion or idea, and thinking about management here, where they've just had their head buried in the ground and it's just gone horribly wrong? I'm sure not with any of your customers, but have you heard any stories?
Well, actually, we've had customers go down the road and more of a dictating a policy and finding it just fall flat, and people just don't pay attention to it, don't do it. So then they bring us in to say, can you help us fix this and figure out what is best? So we do a lot of the change management and doing the surveys and asking the questions and getting the buy-in of everybody. You have to get, from the highest to the lowest, you have to get feedback from everyone so that they all feel like they're part of the answer. So we spend a lot of time in the change management area when people are setting up their policies. But we found when they're dictated from the start, they don't tend to work well.
Okay. And then on that point, Nick, question from Rob. Wall Street Journal reporting this month that 69% of managers are getting stricter with enforcing in-office requirements, and 70% of managers plan to factor office attendee into employee performance review. The labor market swung very significantly, even though the jobs report's still really strong, at least in tech, where there is a lot of fear going around in tech roles. What are you making of this latest WSJ data here?
That might even be our data. I'm not sure. I haven't seen it, but we have similar data. We do a survey with the Atlanta Fed, Chicago, and Stanford. We survey around 500 firms a month. And one of the recent surveys was, what do you do about employees that don't come into the office on in-office days? We also survey 10,000 employees a month and ask them the same question. What does your manager do? And they didn't really match. So employees are saying the typical thing is nothing. And managers say the typical thing is a verbal reprimand, and the second most is actually a docking of performance points. So yes, I think Jared mentioned in Sydney, it's like they're not really matching. Managers are really struggling to enforce it. My broad advice has been, you can, as Alima Cindy, you can enforce plans that make sense and have been designed with employees. So I've worked with a lot of companies, and normally it's some version of what is the other slide, actually, Jared's, working slide, is either anchor days or scheduling days, whereby typically employees are told, look, we do want you in 2-3 days a week is what you want, but let's do it in a coordinated way. And we're going to pick, like Zoom. We're on Zoom. I, went over to Zoom. I had lunch with Eric Yuan, and we're talking to him. Zoom are now having people coming in Tuesday, Thursday. And that seems to work. They get to choose what they do on other days. They mostly work from home. But Tuesday, Thursdays, and they're just enforcing that like you would in 2019. So look, in 2019, if someone said my kid is ill or my water pipes burst and my house is flooding, you'd let them stay at home. But if they said, look, I'm kind of tired, it's a little cold outside, I'd like to stay at home, you'd say, not really, because that is a big negative effect on all your coworkers. And it's the same going to be post-pandemic. If the four of us worked together, and Dan, you just decided you'd stay in and watch, the South Korea Ghana match. Then we have to zoom you in on all the meetings, and it's kind of annoying. So eventually, that's where we're heading to.
I promise you, I won't do it again. But from the but it's absolutely true. I mean, I make a commute to the San Francisco somewhat regularly, and it's a pain, right? It is a pain, but I know that I'm going to have a better experience because of it, and that I'm going to drive the company forward in a more meaningful way. Perhaps we're going to move the ball forwards a couple of extra yards because I'm being in person to meet with this particular partner or whatever. And so much of this is just not about facilities management. This is about alignment with the company's objectives, their mission, their strategy, and how much you're bought into that. And I think one of the big things we're going to see in 2023 is the buy-in to a policy will be around whether is the employee there just because they want to have a job, which is absolutely fine. But are they working to live, or are they living to work? I think there's going to be a real delineation on the culture and performance of a company's hybrid policy about how bought in the staff are to the company's mission and vision. And because if they're bought in, they can get on with okay, I can understand why therefore you want me in on these days, or why I should make an effort. But if it's more like a teacher-parent relationship, whereas we want you in because we need to put bums on desks and this is what we want you to do, and you're not really bought into the mission, vision, the culture of the company, then you're perhaps less likely to follow along. But that's a big macro thought then we probably got time for today. But thank you so much to everybody for joining. Thank you for all the questions that you sent across. I know Jared's busy typing answers to some of those as well on the text here. This will all be available on recording post-meeting. So we'll go ahead and email this round to all of the attendees. But Cindy, Nick, Jared, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. We must do one soon again to look at 2023. Hopefully, I think we're moving from the chaos order into more optimization. But yeah, a huge thank you for joining us today.
Thanks.
Pleasure. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Godspeed.